Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I am excited to bring you our second of 3 tutorials that I'm doing for Magik from Marvel Rivals. And this one is specifically over her pointy left shoulder pad. This thing right here. Yee! But for making this, I have to fly with this cosplay, and I know from other people complaining that they kept poking people and poking themselves, and it would hurt other people. So I kind of had to fix this problem, and I actually designed it so this shoulder pad, all the spikes come apart. So every single one of these spikes on her shoulder pad actually come off and are attached by magnets. And I'll be going over in this video how I made it from scratch with foam and 3D printed parts as well as magnets and how I actually attach it to myself. But before we begin, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. And here's all of the tools and materials that I used for making this shoulder pad. I'll have links to everything in the description, as well as I have a pattern for all the foam parts of this shoulder pad. It also includes a pattern for the sleeve for this part that's out of fabric. And then you will also need to get the 3D CAD file for this part, which includes all of the spikes. It has the dome part, as well as I have what I used for the fake buckle for the straps on the sleeve, which you can find all of this on my website, tiffanycosplay.com, or link in the description. And starting off, you're going to want to 3D print each of these pieces. I used PVA filament, but you can use whatever you want. And I will note that specifically for the dome file, there are going to be a tiny bit of little extra dots at the bottom. This is so that way it will attach to your printer bed easily and you won't have it kind of misfunction when printing, but you will want to clean those off once it is printed, as well as you will want to print all 8 of these spikes. And I highly recommend getting rid of those nasty stair steps that all 3D printers have. And for this, I like to use Rust-Oleum Sandable Primer and just spray it onto the piece. And once the paint is dry, you will go back with some 220 grit sandpaper and sand it away. This will leave all of the primer in those stair step creases and make your surface flat. And then for magnets, and you're gonna need a bunch, because every spike has a magnet and every hole that the spike goes into has a magnet. And I highly recommend putting a dot on the sides that you want the glue to attach to, so that way you know for sure your magnets will attach together. And I also recommend roughing up the side of the magnet that the glue is going to attach to. This way the glue has something to stick on and will not just peel off of a flat surface. And I just use super glue for this. I will note that putting the glue inside all of the holes is a bit more tricky with the magnets as well, so I highly recommend practicing putting the magnet in there before gluing it, so that way you make sure it goes in correctly. But once you're done, you should have this lovely prickly-like thing. Also, side note, if you don't want the spikes to come out for travel, you can just permanently glue them together. That's totally fine as well. But anyway, put that to the side and let's move on to our foam components. And I have indicated in the pattern what parts you need to cut out of what size of foam. And this is A through G, J through K are going to be 2mm foam. For 4mm, it's going to be H and L. For 6mm, this is going to be I and M. And then for 10mm, it's going to be N and O. As well as, don't forget to label each of these parts and heat treat your foam before cutting it out with an X-Acto knife. I'll also note that on parts N and O, this is going to be your outer rim part, the thicker 10mm parts. There are lines on the pattern that are designated for scoring. And scoring means where you're going to use this line as a guideline and cut at a 45-degree angle in one direction following it, rotate your foam 180 degrees, and cut around that line again in that same direction, and that will leave a triangle-like shape of foam that will be able to remove smooth, and this will make it a lot easier for your foam to bend in the correct shape that it needs to be. And I forgot to film it, but I did end up gluing in and O together to create our outer ring. And then you're going to want to go to wherever you sand and round all of the edges using a sanding drum. And then for placement on top of our 3D printed dome shape. And I will leave this image here as a guideline for you to follow, but this is pretty much the location where each of the pieces will lay down. And I recommend tracing the location onto the dome part where the foam is supposed to lay, so that way you have a clear indication of where they're going to lay, but more importantly, where to put your contact cement glue to the surface. And once the glue is dry, then we can start to attach them, and I recommend starting with letters H and L first. And I also recommend attaching it with the spike in the cutout part hole for it, so that way you make sure that they actually align correctly. And then connecting the pieces underneath it, which are going to be I and M, again attaching with the spikes in the holes. And lastly, you can start attaching all of the smaller pieces, so A through E, followed by our triangle pieces F, G, J, and K. And then for attaching our last foam piece, and this is going to be the outer rim part. And for this, it's going to attach to the bottom part of the dome. Do make sure that the foam and the dome are facing the correct direction, making sure that your foam piece A is the top part of this piece, and then starting from the top and working your way around. And there is an indentation on the dome where this part is supposed to lay. Also note that I did go back with a tiny bit of super glue afterwards in certain spots to help prevent the foam from coming up a tiny bit more, but you may not need this. But that pretty much finished the fabrication part of this shoulder pad. So let's move on to painting now. And here's all of the tools and materials that I used for painting the shoulder pad. As a reminder, if you don't have an airbrush setup, you can always paint this by hand with a paintbrush. And our first step is, like always, priming our surface. And I do this with Plasti-Dip. 3 heavy coats to be precise. And then wait 24 hours for all of that to fully dry, and it is on to painting. And we're going to be using paint provided by Createx Colors, as well as my airbrush and compressor provided by Iwata Airbrush. Starting with our first coat of paint, which is going to be Autoborn Sealer Black. Now this paint is specifically for painting on more 3D printed smooth surfaces. This is going to make sure all of the paint afterwards adheres to the surface a lot easier and doesn't drip off of smooth surfaces. So I highly recommend starting with this, but if not, then you can just go straight into painting as well. And the first color that we're going to be mixing is a mixture of Createx Opaque Black, Gray, and White. Applying this more towards the rim section of this shoulder pad. And while the paint is still wet, we're gonna grab an object. I used just some metal tweezers on the backside of it. And while the paint's still wet, I kind of scraped apart along some of the edges, gave it some slash marks. And what this is doing is it's going to remove the top layer of paint and expose the undercolor. And the undercolor that we had beforehand was black. So it's going to show these darker colors underneath this lighter gray color and kind of give it some more texture, some more battle damage like look. Then wait for it to dry and mask off that rim section. And we're going to be moving on to basically the same colors, but we're going to be adding a ton more black to it. And one more time, wait for that to dry. And then we're going to mask off that next layer of detailed parts. Basically all of the foam parts we're going to be masking off now. And then we're going to be painting pretty much just the surface of the dome black. As well as I did this for the spikes. And then for all of the parts that we want to glue, I ended up masking off everything else except for these small few components, and we're gonna start off with a base coat of opaque white. Reason being for white is we want all of the colors that are gonna go on top of this to be more vibrant. And we're gonna start with Pyro Orange to do this. And then with our last color, it's going to be Hansa Yellow. And now for this Hansa Yellow, I didn't apply it as a solid color. I applied it focusing more into the center part of each of these locations and pulling the airbrush away from the surface, so that way it gave a more radiant-like feel to the outer edges and wasn't solid. And this is going to have it where the edges are going to show more of that orange part, where the center is going to be more of that yellow part, and it's going to give you this glow-like effect. And once that's dry, you can remove the rest of your masking tape and any type of covering that you had. And our last step for painting to finish out these shoulder pads is to seal them. And we're going to be using Createx Colors UVLS Satin, applying it evenly onto all surfaces, including the spikes as well. And this is going to leave everything one consistent shine. It's going to look even, as well as it's going to protect the paint colors from fading from UV lights. And this right here is the final outcome of the shoulder pad and all of the magnets to help it stay together. And as I said, all of these spikes come apart. It's actually attached with a magnet on the bottom, as well as inside each of these spots there is a magnet, so that way you can stick them in place. I also designed this sleeve that would sit underneath it, and it is just Velcro on this part that attaches to here to hold it in place. And then there's this strap with another piece of Velcro, and this is actually what attaches and holds it up on the body. And on the neck piece, I have a piece of Velcro underneath, and this strap is what attaches to the neck piece. And that's what holds it up. I will note that it does pull at the neck slightly, and to help reduce this, I did end up adding Velcro right here underneath the breastplate, as well as it attaches underneath this shoulder pad onto the shirt, and that helps to pull the rest of it this way and kind of help with it going and moving around, but it still pulls a little bit. It works fine, and I wore it a full day at a convention, and I'm really happy with the final outcome. Guys, is how I made the shoulder pad, and I'm really happy with how the final outcome came. It took a lot of engineering for me to figure out this giant porcupine puzzle and to make it so I can travel with it and not poke people with it, hopefully. But anyway, I hope this was helpful, and if so, let me know in the comments, as well as what other characters should I cosplay next from Marvel Rivals. I am actually thinking of doing another one pretty soon, so let me know. As well as a big thank you to all of my company sponsors and all of my YouTube members, specifically those legendary members who help so I can continue doing this as my full-time job. And I'll see you for our next tutorial, which the last one of our series is actually going to be on the breastplate. So stay tuned.